So I have to confess that on my list of possible videos to make, I did not have anything on weather prediction, but here we are. So I was watching a live stream the other day from Dr. Daniel Swain, who's a climate scientist and science communicator at UCLA. Super helpful, especially for anyone living in the U.S. West. When I lived in California, I learned quite a lot from him about wildfire and fire weather. It was super helpful. So I will link his channel and the stream and a clip in the description if you want to check that out. I very much recommend it. Anyways, he was doing a stream talking about the Trump administration's decision to close down the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado, which is a very big deal. So here's what Swain says about that. The proposal to dismantle NCAR is the most dramatic development so far by a wide margin in the broader effort to dismantle science in general and weather and climate science in particular in the United States. So this is quite a serious thing. But it caught my attention from the standpoint of making a video, because the other thing that Swain does in that stream is he connects this decision to the text in Project 2025, which is sort of the playbook for the Trump administration that high-ranking members of the administration sort of authored beforehand. And the quote that he points to is this. So there's a section which talks about climate science, which they refer to as the climate alarm industry, naturally. And the quote is, this industry's mission emphasis on prediction and management seems designed around the fatal conceit of planning for the unplannable. So the reason this caught my attention is because this is a not so subtle appeal to our friend Friedrich Hayek, who I just covered in the previous video, the famous economist who was a big defender of capitalism and is one of the founders of neoliberalism. One of his most famous books is called The Fatal Conceit. And it's not just the title that they're using there. There's a kind of a version of one of his main ideas in that book that's in that quote. And his main thesis there, which is interesting, if nothing else, is basically that it's almost a version of philosophical conservatism, which in this context would mean something like this. When you have really massive, complex systems that are hard to understand and are also very important. So in his case, he's talking about the economy, or you might be talking about ecology or social, a culture or something like this. Really massive, complex systems. You should be very cautious about intervening in those systems in radical ways because you don't know what's going to happen. They're sort of unpredictable, and that's a very risky and dangerous thing to do. So that's the kind of general point. He's making a more specific point about capitalism versus socialism, and he's using this to argue against socialism because he sees a planned economy as sort of committing this sin. You have something super duper complicated like economic activity writ large, and to think that you can just sort of design it in a way that would work is foolish. Instead, you should let markets do their thing, right? Have all these decentralized actors make their own decisions, and that's sort of the idea of capitalism. So Project 2025 is trying to apply this to weather and climate, right? And you could say, well, climate is this incredibly complex system. It is foolish to, I don't know, predict and manage it. Now, before I go further, I actually have to point out one really funny irony, at least to me, from Hayek. In that book, The Fatal Conceit, he doesn't really use that phrase, the fatal conceit, very often. It shows up a couple of times in the text. But one of the things that he says when he's talking about like what precisely, how to understand that phrase, one of the things he says is the idea that man is able to shape the world around him according to his wishes. Now, we're usually used to, in the sort of technological capitalist world that we live in, celebrating that idea. Like, yeah, we're going to bend nature to our will. He's saying, no, that you can't do that. Now, that's deeply ironic, as I just sort of indicated, because usually people who are the biggest cheerleaders of capitalism are like, it's great because it allows us to shape the world according to our wishes. He didn't seem to see that. Anyways, I'm not usually in the position of defending Hayek. I guess I'm not, but like the way that Project 2025 uses this idea is even, is kind of ridiculous, right? So they say, climate science is based on this fatal conceit of planning for the unplannable. So I guess the idea is that they think that climate is completely unpredictable, or weather is unpredictable. And I know this is like a common idea for people. People like to, poke fun at meteorologists. Like, it's the one job where you can be wrong 50% of the time and still keep your job, right? Really, I've heard that maybe 1,000 times. But first we should note that, and I'm not a meteorologist or a climate scientist, but I consume a fair amount of that relevant information. We're actually really, really good at predicting the weather. Like, it's almost shocking, and it's improved quite a lot over the years. Now, it is true that, weather prediction isn't perfect, but it's not because we don't understand how the atmosphere works. We actually understand it quite well. The problem is that we can never collect enough data about the state of the atmosphere at a given time to be able to sort of run perfect simulations. It's not that we don't understand how it works. Whereas like something like the economy, or we're talking about societies like social institutions, we don't quite understand how those work, right? Like we know some things, but it's much, much messier. So I would say it's unfair to Hayek to sort of say the same thing about the atmosphere that we would say about the economy. Now, even if you disagree there, it's worth noting that his primary point is about intervention in the system. You need to be careful about that. He's not saying like, hey, the economy is complicated, so we shouldn't study it. Like, he's an economist, right? So the analogy here would be like, hey, the atmosphere is complicated, climate's complicated, so don't intervene in it. And actually, in a way, that supports what a lot of leading climate scientists say, namely that like all of these proposals to engage in climate engineering are risky and dangerous, right? So intervening in the weather is, even if like to the extent that we can do it, which is quite limited as far as I understand it, that's quite risky. That would sort of fit with what Hayek is saying. Not that we can't try to understand it, try to predict what it's going to do and act accordingly. It's a very different thing. I also want to address one stupid argument that I've heard a bunch of times from high-ranking political officials, where in order to argue for the fundamental unpredictability of climate, they argue this way. Well, sometimes we can't even accurately predict, or we don't, I don't say we can't, predict the weather one day out. How are you going to tell me about what the weather is going to be like in 10 years, which is sort of like what, stuff around global warming is often saying. And it's true, right? Like, in terms of weather prediction, we're very good in the sort of 1 to 3 day window, but as you get to 5 and 7 and 10, 14 days, then, accuracy falls off quite a bit. Now, I hope that you think this is a bad argument, but I want to go through it anyways and maybe give a nice way to respond for, if you encounter someone who says something like that. First of all, the nature of the prediction is very, very, very different. No climate scientist is trying to predict the weather at a given location at a given date 10 years in the future. That we cannot do, right? So when you're asking what is the weather tomorrow, you're asking for a super fine-grained piece of information at a particular place and time, what the actual temperature is it raining, etc. No one is trying to do that in, when they're talking about, global warming over 5-10 years. We don't know what the weather is going to be like, but it is extremely predictable that there will be much more heat in the entire system. Right? Like, that's easy to predict. You're not trying to predict the precise weather. And there's lots of interesting questions about how weather patterns will change, and there's lots of interesting research on that, and we can know with some, some degree of confidence about those things. To me, that kind of argument is like, it's like saying something like this, right? Imagine you're like, I think it's going to be warmer in the summer compared to the winter. Duh. But then someone goes, oh, really? Do you know what the temperature is going to be tomorrow? And let's say you don't. You're like, no. Well, then how are you going to tell me, you know what it's going to be like 6 months out? Because we understand how seasons work? Like, you see what I mean? It's kind of like that. Like, likewise with climate, we don't know what exactly the weather is going to be like at a given day, obviously, but with a bunch of heat in the system, like, it's a good bet is going to be warmer. Like, in fact, it's obvious, it's trivial, it's elementary. So anyways, you can pick your favorite kind of analogy as a way to respond, but sometimes there are kind of related things in the future that we can predict quite well, even if we don't know the super precise specifics tomorrow. Or like, just to take another case, like, do you know exactly when the sun is going to set tomorrow? No. So how are you so confident that it is going to set 20 years from now? I don't know. Similar kind of thing. Anyways, that was ridiculous, and I wanted to just make a quick video on that because we had a surprise intertwining of Hayek and Project 2025. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's not a surprise. That particular sort of application of Hayek's ideas is a surprise to me. But Hayek is a hero for anyone who considers them politically conservative, usually. Usually it's the other book, The Road to Serfdom, that gets mentioned, which is a far less interesting text. Maybe one day I'll talk about it. But yeah, that's all for now. See you next time.